In at number 10, Battery Ditto. This creepypasta was written by an unknown author on the Creepypasta wiki page. It's a story about how Team Rocket was experimenting on Dittos, using several of them to try to create a new Pokemon. They would keep them in cramped cages wired with electricity, and if they ever made a peep, they would be shocked almost to death. One night a security guard was falling asleep, so he released his Arcanine to watch over them. When he woke up from a loud scream, he discovered that a Ditto had bred with the Arcanine. After several weeks of the Ditto not changing back to its original shape, the dark looking Arcanine gave birth to an egg. When the egg finally hatched, it was a Pokemon that they then called Houndour. With this new discovery of birthing Pokemon, Team Rocket rapidly began trying to replicate the process, torturing the Dittos as they went through it. And while some results were successful, most led to the death of many Pokemon. Word traveled fast, and soon the lab was destroyed, releasing all of the trapped Dittos and the newly created Pokemon. However, this did not stop Team Rocket. They continued torturing any Ditto that they could find, and still, to this day, are attempting to manipulate them. There is no end to the mutations that they can force on those poor battery Dittos. And at number 9, Mewtwo. This creepypasta story is based on an original tale found on tumblr.com. It's about a gamer who picks up a copy of Pokemon Blue, and when he begins playing, a Mewtwo starts stalking him. Every time he entered into the grass, he would be thrown into a battle with a level 70 Mewtwo. And at the time, all of his Pokemon had very low levels, so sure enough, the Mewtwo made quick work of his party. However, the strange thing was that when Mewtwo defeated one of his Pokemon, they were completely wiped from his party. He continued to reset his device, but nothing worked. They were all still gone. Oddly, upon restarting, the Mew glitch occurred when the gamer managed to make it to Lavender Town without running into the Mewtwo. This glitch would keep Mew in your party no matter what. And when he inevitably ran into the Mewtwo again, his party was wiped out, leaving only the Mew to face him. When both were down to just a sliver of health, the Mew used Explosion, causing both Pokemon to faint and the screen to go black. Upon restarting, the Mewtwo was there and with a text that read, "What have I become?" It then used Struggle on itself, resulting in a Pokeball containing Sacred Ash to remain in its place. The gamer used this to revive his once defeated party and would come to the revelation that maybe Mewtwo isn't just a monster, but a Pokemon with a compassionate heart after all. In at number 8, Mount Silver. This is a creepy yet somehow touching story about the ghost of your rival in the first Pokemon games. It's known that years before you meet Professor Oak, he trained your rival Red to reach Mount Silver. What's unknown is that once Red was there, he was never heard from again. And upon failed attempts at contacting him, Professor Oak travels to Mount Silver to discover that Red has died. What he sees though is the spirit of Red, and his ghost simply utters, "Help me." Oak knew that he needed to find a trainer worthy enough to make it to Mount Silver in order to free the spirit of Red. The Elite Four are positioned strategically as your last test to prove your worthiness as a trainer. When you finally meet Red at Mount Silver, he's surprised to see you, and with no words exchanged, a battle of epic proportions ensues. When you have won the battle, Red says nothing, and before disappearing from your view, he has a faint smile, almost to say, "Thank you." And at number 7, Will I Ever Be Free? This creepypasta is a short, sad, and creepy origin story for the Pokemon known as Yamask. It tells the tale of a Yamask who rested well as a ghost inside of an ancient tomb, only to be tormented by its rebirth. It could remember its past life, even stating that the Pokemon was once human. It despises its new creature-like form that lurks through the night and claims that all it has left is its mask, the mask that represents its face from a past life. It's disgusted by its new life as a ghostly devil that gives its trainer immense power. The author then ends the story tragically with the last line being, "My face was once so beautiful. All I could do was stare at the mask and weep silently to myself.
I can never be free."
In at number 6, You Will Join Us. This creepypasta is about a gamer who loved playing Pokemon Gold and worked so hard to build his team up. When his battery drained, he ended up losing all of his saves. And as a result, he moved on to the newer versions of Pokemon, but when Pokemon Heart Gold was released, he was excited to replay a familiar region. And when he starts the game, Professor Elm greets him by name, except he says welcome back. This was odd, but he continued. He would then say, "They're waiting for you." At this point, he loses control of his character and is now teleported to Lavender Town, where he sees 6 gravestones, all of which had his Pokemon Gold teammates' names written on them. They rose from the graves, except in a more pixelated Game Boy Color version, each one confronting the player that he had forgotten them and left them behind. Then one addressed him by name, saying,
"We are yours, so if you will not permit us to join you, you will join us.
Immediately after that, his sprite began doing the dig animation, causing the screen to go completely dark. Number 3. Braid. This is a creepypasta that is great if you're looking for a good Halloween story to read. It occurs around Ilex Forest and is told in 3 separate narratives that come together to create an unsettling atmosphere. Standing between the player and Goldenrod City, they know they have to enter the forest. An old tale about the history of Ilex Forest involves villagers bringing baskets of food to the edge of the forest, and we learn that it is left there for a witch in exchange of fruitful harvests each year. However, we learn that if they look at the witch while she is using her magic, the blessing will become a curse. This tremendous creepypasta also goes into detail about the leader of the nearby town's daughter and her curiosity leading her to a curse from the witch, trapping her in the forest and thus becoming the voice of the forest. That's why when you enter Ilex Forest, you're warned, and even the trees seem to be weeping and moaning, just watching as the witch turns each new helpless child into a gift to the voice of the forest. Number 2. Best friends forever. As much as I enjoy the hacked games and the dramatic stories that people tell using Pokemon locations, this one is especially freaky. It's a tale of a girl and her best friend. That friend was a Torchic named Blue. The player would always play with her real life friend Talia, but when Talia said that she didn't want to be friends with her anymore, the player just transfers that companionship to her Pokemon characters. Playing night and day, one day Talia snatched her Game Boy out of her hand and threw it to the ground, and was about to crush it with her foot before the game just lets out a loud screeching noise. Talia turns pale and runs away, and her friend Blue's stats also change as well, from likes to sleep to angry. And after moving on to new Pokemon games, the player said goodbye to her old friends and started anew with a Mudkip named Red. As she continued to buy new games, she would bring over her best players from previous versions until she remembered she forgot about her old friend Blue. When starting up her old Pokemon Ruby game, a strange message came on the screen that just said, "You promised you wouldn't replace me." This is where it gets weird. Then she begins having a conversation with Blue, where the Pokemon is responding on the screen to everything she says. Then Blue asks if Talia is still mean to her, even saying that it got very angry. The player decides to carry Blue over to the new game, but first, she's asked by her mother to pick up a pie pan that she lent to Talia's mother. The girl runs over to Talia's home, but there's no answer. And when she hears a scream, she runs into the house to find Talia with burn marks all over her body and a knife in her neck. Her parents were also hung in the basement. She finds Talia's little brother hiding, who tells her that they were just watching TV when a loud beeping noise went off, and Talia was just dead. She rushes home, and on her DS is a text from Blue saying, "She was mean to you. She deserved it." She wakes up around 3 AM to a beeping noise similar to the one Talia's brother heard, and it's Blue. All of her Pokemon begin disappearing, and a text appears, "Now we can be best friends forever." Suddenly she wakes up in her bedroom, but she doesn't recognize anything. She runs downstairs to see a lady she doesn't know, and the woman turns and says, "Good morning, honey. You're finally awake. Our neighbor Professor Birch is anxious to meet you." Number 1. Pokemon Black. This is an infamous hacked version of Pokemon. It begins normally, except with a 4th option for a Pokemon being Ghost. If the player selects Ghost, it starts at a level 1, and is only capable of one move, Curse. When the player uses Curse in battle, the screen cuts to black and only cries of their enemy can be heard. Then, when they return, the Pokemon is gone. When they fought against a trainer, the same thing would happen, except each defeat meant a loss of their Pokeball. And once they were gone, the player could actually use Curse on the trainer. This would replace the character with a tombstone. And after defeating the Elite Four, the game changes again, and a text appears many years later. At this point, where all of these stories begin to get creepy, the player ends up in Lavender Town, except this time as an elderly man standing in front of tombstones. In this post-game world, it's just void of any NPCs, with only tombstones where they used to be. When returning to where they started the game, the player learns that every living thing was dead because the player and Ghost had cursed them. Finally, the Ghost character appears, but this time, it's against your player. The old man character only has one move, and it's Struggle. Until almost having no health, the Ghost uses Curse for one last time, attacking the player. The screen then fades to black, and upon rebooting it, the game file was erased. Coming in at number 10, The Shadow. This creepypasta is about a gamer who believes Pokemon are stalking him in real life. After his older brother died, he left behind a lot of his old games, and our protagonist decides to play some of the Pokemon games and even continues from where his brother left off. He notices something a bit weird though. All of the Pokemon in the wild that he came across were Gengars. And when entering into battle with one of them, his Pokemon looked absolutely frightened. He continued anyways, and when trying to catch the wild Pokemon, it failed. Except oddly, a message appeared on the screen that said, "Leave now or suffer." Creeped out by this, he shut off the Game Boy to try to get some rest. And as he was trying to fall asleep, he could hear a demonic laugh coming from the Game Boy. Just as he was about to get up to check it, he saw big glowing red eyes and a shiny white smirk in the shadows of his room. Terrified, he closed his eyes and ran to turn on the lights, but before he could reach them, he tripped, breaking his ankle in the process. That's when he sees his Game Boy light up and a text box appear beside a Gengar that just said,
"I guess you chose suffer."
Number 9. Abandoned Poké Doll. This Pokemon creepypasta is an interesting take on what happens when a once beloved Poké Doll gets left behind. It felt like if Toy Story 3 was a horror movie. The story begins simple enough from the doll's perspective of loving its owner and how it was its favorite doll. And as time passed, it became forgotten and was eventually thrown in the trash. That's when the story takes its dark turn. The doll actually comes to life and seeks out its previous owner. When it arrives at the house where it once resided, it finds a ton of new dolls scattered around the room. It then goes on a rampage, destroying the other dolls and eventually slitting the throat of its previous owner. Number 8. Let Me Serve You. This creepypasta is about a Pokemon event that happened where gamers were given the opportunity to have the Mew character as part of their new event release. The gamer decides to level up the rest of his Pokemon before using Mew, but for some reason, Mew keeps jumping into battle. Even after moving him to the bottom spot several times, he continuously replaces the first Pokemon with a text box appearing that just says, "Mew wants to battle." Another creepy part was that no matter what he tried, Mew would always say, "I want to serve you, let me serve you." Now, protagonist was terrified when he restarted his game to find that all of his Pokemon were dead, and their sprites were gray with a red X over the photo. When he tries to leave Mew in a Pokemon Center, his sprite looks angry, and another text box appears that says, "You can't get rid of me," followed by Mew playing the death song. This let out a terrible screeching noise, causing the gamer to black out and wake up in his bed. Believing it was all just a horrible nightmare, he picks up the Game Boy to play again, only to be met with a text box next to Mew that said, "Welcome back, let me serve you." Number 7. Trapped in a Cave. This creepypasta is more sad and disturbing than just scary, but still, it's a good one. It's a tale of a player who comes across a horrible sight in a cave. The only light seemed to be coming from the tail of a Charizard named Ruby. Ruby was with her trainer, but something was wrong. The trainer was missing his arm and both legs. Ruby appeared to be sad and afraid. The trainer repeatedly kept asking the Charizard if it was hungry, but Ruby denied, but its rumbling stomach told another story. The man insisted, eventually placed his arm in between Ruby's fangs. Eventually, the Charizard closed its eyes and bit off his arm, leaving only a head and torso. Eventually, the trainer falls asleep and the Charizard keeps crying and crying, as if it knew what was going to happen next when it got hungry. Number 6. Abandoned Loneliness. This creepypasta revolves around a hack copy of Leaf Green, given to a friend and begins with an EV called Loneliness, except the E in Loneliness is missing for some reason. And at the beginning, the player's name is Leaf and follows a number of very strange events and signs that take place in an area called Emptiness, not Pallet Town. After exploring, the player notices that this town is filled with these NPCs that appear to look like ghosts with blood coming from their eyes. The ghost constantly gives strange and evil advice to the character as they progress through the game. As fog covers most of the landscape, the player notices the tiles on the ground spelling out cryptic messages. One of the ghosts even says, "Can't you do better?" The signs and ghosts continue to warn of a friend who betrayed loneliness. Leaf even sees the game's rival Blue pleading to not believe the ghosts and to run before they get you. The player finds out that Blue abandoned loneliness, and after several creepy messages, including one from Brock who said the ghost tricked him, the player shuts off his game. Months later, he picks it back up again, but everything is different. His character is called Sorrow, and his Eevee is a different Pokemon named Unwanted. He eventually enters into a battle with a wild Eevee named Loneliness, and when he defeats it, the player turns into one of those ghosts and is now said to be cursed as well. Suddenly, he's in Pallet Town again, where Red and Blue say that Leaf got the brunt of the curse. He interacts with a signpost nearby and it just says, "Loneliness was put to rest, RIP. A critical hit. This creepypasta is based on a story called Ashamed and is written by an unknown author on the Creepypasta wiki page for Pokemon. It begins begins with a boy waiting for his dad in the car, and while waiting he decided to play on his old Game Boy. While in the car he locked the doors and turned on the radio to avoid the silence while playing. His team was fairly well established except for this one gold duck that he had. Trying to level him up, he would keep him in his party but only use it on rare occasions. And while training for the Elite Four, he came across a shiny Persian Pokemon, and excited to catch him, he knew that he would have to knock his HP down to just enough without letting it faint. To make that happen, he used his gold duck. However, to his shock, the gold duck ended up finishing off the Persian. He screamed at the Game Boy and couldn't believe that this gold duck just made him miss an opportunity to catch a shiny Pokemon. The next time he tried using the gold duck, it would miss every attack, and suddenly a text box appeared that read, "Golduck is ashamed." When this happened, the radio in the car went to static, and a fog began to settle around the vehicle. And when the boy looked back at his Game Boy, he was now facing the Golduck. A loud blare of white noise filled the speakers as the Golduck attacked his sprite, causing his trainer to faint. The screen then went to black, and now every time that he turns on the game, the only message he gets is, "It was a critical hit. Come follow me." This creepypasta was written by an unknown author, and it's quite long, so I'll do my best to summarize it for you. When Pokemon Red and Green were released in Japan around February of 1996, there was a strange peak in deaths for the 10 to 15-year-old age group. They were usually found dead by hanging themselves or jumping from tall buildings. Investigators believed it was linked to the Lavender Town Syndrome rumors, but upon inspecting the games, they soon found out that the kids playing the games were rather low, meaning that they hadn't even had time to reach Lavender Town before all these terrible things began happening. Upon further investigation, they discovered that a programmer for the company had committed suicide, and when they searched his apartment, things only got more creepy. There were crumpled up notes everywhere with the words "Do not enter," "Watch out," and "Come follow me" in bold. Before the investigators were eventually killed themselves after looking too deep into the game, they discovered that the programmer had placed a code in the tall grass before you meet Professor Oak. A decade later, when a retired officer reopened the file on the case, he attempted to find out just what happened. When you enter that tall grass, it ends up showing text from your deceased loved ones, filling your head with voices that repeat the saying,
"Come follow me,"
forcing many to take their own lives in hopes of either rejoining their loved ones or perhaps just to end the voices in their head. Blue Tears. This next creepypasta is based on a story written by a user named I'm Dead. While exploring a yard sale, our protagonist finds a Pokemon Blue cartridge with the word Tears written on it. When he booted up the game, he chose the previous save to see where the owner had been at with the game. However, he was met with an odd text box that read, "I've been robbed of everything. My title is champion, my grandfather's respect, even my Pokemon are dead because of you. I won't stand for this. I will come find you." When playing through the game, the character Blue seemed to be on a mission for revenge. He watched as the character took control, traveling to Mount Silver, and when he reached his destination, he engaged in a fight with his rival. However, there were no Pokemon involved, just the trainers. The only option available was murder, and when he selected that, Blue ruthlessly killed his rival and then took his own life. Just like that, our protagonist's nose began to bleed, and the game shut itself off. The following day on the news, he saw a terrifying headline. It was the man he had purchased the game from. He had murdered his wife and then took his own life. The gamer couldn't believe it. Could it be the game that was doing this? He ends the story by saying, "I'm next. I don't know how much longer I have, nor do I know who will die at my hand. But you deserve to know this. Never play Blue Tears." In at number 2, Poor Rival. This creepypasta is more of a history lesson on your rival, but it still remains something to consider when playing the game that may creep you out. When you meet your rival in Lavender Town, he's actually there to lay his fallen Raticate to rest. The one Pokemon that you actually defeated in your last meeting. Instead of blaming you for his loss, your rival channels his hatred for you into becoming the Indigo League champion. However, before he can do that, you beat him once again. And at the end, your poor rival is scolded by his grandfather while you receive the professor's praise. Throughout the game, you manage to crush your rival's innocence, crush his dreams, and steal away the love from his own grandfather. The author then ends the story by saying, maybe he's a ghost that can't leave, or just an orphan who lost his Raticate in a freak accident and can't stop thinking about it, and never leaving until death itself can rid of it. But that's how it goes. Or maybe it's just all in your head. Lastly, in our number 1 spot, Everything Dies. This creepypasta is based on a story by an author known as Flaky Porcupine. Great name. It's told from the perspective of a young Paris Pokemon, who at a young age lost its father. The Pokemon's mother would tell the young Paris that everything dies, sweetie, it's what we were born to do. Confused by this, it tries to lead a normal life in the woods, wrestling with other Pokemon, but with each day it can feel the parasites on its back growing and taking control of its body. And when it finally is captured by a trainer, to which it refers to as a two-legger, it continually hears the mentioning of the number 24. What that Paris doesn't know is that the trainers are talking about the level in which Paris evolves. And when it's experiencing its evolution, the trainer says it's okay, everything dies, which finally makes it understand what its mother was talking about. The author then describes the transformation by saying, "My body suddenly glows in an intense white that would blind one's eyes before I too become just like my brethren around me. It felt great pain, that of 1,000 knives piercing its body. The last thing it hears is congratulations, your Paris evolved into a parasect." And at number 10 is Lavender Town Syndrome. This turn of phrase, also known as Lavender Town Tone or Lavender Town Suicides, is extremely shocking to learn about. Back in February of 1996, when Pokemon Red and Green were released in Japan, they experienced a number of suicides and illness in children between the ages of 7 and 12. Apparently these suicides came from the high frequencies that were played in the theme music of Lavender Town, and it's rumored that at least 200 children committed suicide, with many others developing illnesses and afflictions. It's known that children have very sensitive hearing, so the developers soon changed the tone of Lavender Town. And to study this phenomenon, the developers created a software to analyze this audio. But when it played, it creates images of the unknown, a character in the game Pokemon. This is a terrifying revelation because that character didn't even appear until later games, and is said to translate to "leave now." Number 9. Buried Alive. There are a ton of hacked Pokemon games out there, but this one was actually an intended original script for the game known as the Berryman script. It was initially meant to be a boss, but I believe it was just too freaky for players, especially considering their demographic. And in a battle view mode, the Buried Alive character looks like a decaying human corpse, and if you happen to lose the battle, the Berryman will say, "Finally, fresh meat." Then he would drag your player into the ground. Following that, the typical game over screen would appear, but in the background, you can see the Buried Alive character devouring your player. Then suddenly, this creepy soundtrack and animation called Static Mesh would appear. Followed by this disturbing message. What is that even supposed to mean? Like, it's also believed that it may have a similar effect to the Lavender Tone that I mentioned before. Number 8, Pokemon Lost Silver. After buying a used Pokemon Silver game, this player was weirded out to find the game they continued into from the previous player had 999 hours put into the game, all 16 badges and 99,999 Pokedollars and all 251 Pokemon in the Pokedex. The only Pokemon in the player's arsenal were unknowns that spelled out the word leave, and a Cyndaquil named Hurry. After landing in a dark cave, the player used Cyndaquil's flash to see and soon regretted what they saw. The walls were covered in blood red. The player landed in a new dark room and then again tried to use the flash, but then it just said Hurry has fainted. And the unknowns now spelt out the word he died. Now his character was white with bloody tears coming from his eyes. Plus his badge count kept changing. First to 24, then to 32. The unknowns now spelled dying. After engaging in a battle with a Pikachu, his Pokemon didn't say fainted, it said it had died. Then the Pikachu also died. The character even comes across the Pokemon Gold sprite that says goodbye forever. He then appears in a small room filled with graves, and all the gym leaders at the bottom were replaced with skulls. The unknowns then spelled I'm dead. A final text came up on the screen that read RIP, and the player could not escape, no matter what they pressed. It seemed as though this hacked copy was telling a story of a young trainer who, despite his efforts in becoming a Pokemon master, still couldn't avoid death and being forgotten by the next generation. Number 7, Here Lies Giovanni. This creepypasta is based on a story called Colorblind found on the Creepypasta wiki page. It's a tale of a gamer who falls deep into a hacked copy of Pokemon Yellow. In the game, the main character is named Dane and he has a Pikachu named Laddie. The gamer finds out that this storyline is much different than he's ever played. It follows Dane, Laddie, and another traveler named Delia, who travels with them throughout the game. And after becoming somewhat famous for his successes in battles, he's asked to become the gym leader for Viridian City. He then hears a snap and his game shuts off. But when he restarts it, a text box appears that says 1 year later. His sprite is different. He's now the gym leader, but his Pikachu is missing. The gamer soon comes to realize that Laddie had passed away in the year that Dane was the gym leader. He has one last interaction with his old friend Delia, who doesn't want anything to do with him after his neglect led to the loss of Laddie. He gives her his mother's old house in Pallet Town and decides that it's best if they just part ways. Then, once again, the game clicks and shuts off. And when the gamer restarts, Dane's sprite is now wearing a striped suit and has much more defined, mature features. The game takes over in cinematic fashion and brings Dane to the Pokemon Tower. He says one last goodbye to Laddie, and a text box appears that says, "I will never find another you, but a Pikachu I will find. I will form an organization to purge Kanto for me. I came as Dane, but I will leave as another." The sprite walks along the tombstone, stopping at one, where a text box appears that says, "I must find a name appropriate to depart with." The tombstone just reads, "Here lies Giovanni." Number 6, Nightmare's Revenge. In this creepypasta story from the wiki page, a gamer has an evil encounter with a rogue Gengar. He first comes across the Pokemon in the wild, and when he catches it, he names it Nightmare. And after regular life events took over, the gamer never really had time to play his Pokemon Soul Silver. And when he finally picked it back up, the Gengar was no longer in his party. And in front of him was his rival curled up in a pool of blood, barely alive. With his last words he said, "Ethan, a Gengar attacked me." He said something about finding a guy named Red. "Here, take this." What he gave him was a crucifix of some kind. And after tracking down the Gengar, he battled with him, except the Gengar somehow knew the gamer's real name. He said, "Tell me, Ben, do you still care about me?" Ben answered by just hitting the yes option, but Nightmare didn't care. He wiped out Ben's Pokemon, and with only his sprite left on the screen, Ben remembered the crucifix. He used that, and then the Gengar sprite appeared shocked as it sunk into the ground, leaving a text box that said, "Nightmare has died." And as the credits rolled and Ben in complete shock, he was about to shut off his Game Boy when Nightmare's red eyes filled the screen and a demonic voice said,
I wouldn't celebrate so soon, Ben. For as long as you live, I will haunt you.
Number 5, Divulging into Madness. This next creepypasta story is about the brainwashing that Pokemon had on the brain of a young girl. Her parents bought her a Pokemon game to fit in with her new friends at school, but what they didn't see coming was how isolated it actually made her. She was obsessed with it, and only took her eyes off the screen while sleeping. And one night the parents snuck into her room to see what was so appealing about the game. They discovered that she had only been playing for 13 hours, but that didn't make any sense because since buying her the game months ago, she never put it down. And when the little girl wakes up, she starts her Pokemon game, but from this perspective, we see that the game has been talking to her. And the character Red told the little girl about her parents sneaking into the room to play the game, and that they needed to be taken care of. Obsessed with the game, she obeyed. And when her parents greeted her in the kitchen, she grabbed the knife from the drawer, and as the game instructed her, "Good girl, now finish him," she quickly slits her father's throat, and with her mother in disbelief, she desperately tries to convince her daughter to drop the knife and the Game Boy in her other hand.
Red then says, now darling, don't listen. She wants to take me again, and who knows what she'll do.
With her mother now trying to run away, the girl throws the knife, hitting her mother in the back. Red then says, "Your suffering ends now. Now we can be friends forever." In at number 4, Tick, Tick, Tick. This creepypasta story is about why beating Pokemon may not be such a good idea. Our protagonist plays his way through the game, and after every gym leader he defeats, they all say the same thing. Tick, tick, tick. He is waiting. Every single time they say that. Before he is about to face Red at Mount Silver, his sprite says, "For the sake of you and me, the ticking needs to continue." He ignored the message and decided to find out exactly why the trainers were warning him of Red. And when he defeats Red, a text box appears saying, "Tick, tick, boom." And just as the gamer is reading the word boom, his Game Boy sends a jolt of electricity, shocking him so much that he drops the game. And when he picks it up, the save file is corrupted. That's when he pieces together his character's last message. When you defeat Red, there is nothing. The ticking was leading him to that. As long as Red was undefeated, everyone in the game would still exist. Beat the game, and you destroy their world. Hence his character saying, "For the sake of you and me, the ticking needs to continue." Oddly, he can still hear the subtle ticking noise wherever he goes. Even with a digital clock, he hears tick, tick, tick. In at number 5, loss of purpose. This heartbreaking creepypasta is about the characters in the Pokemon game and what happens when they're left behind. Our protagonist picked up an old copy of Pokemon Red, but noticed that after every trainer or enemy he defeated, they would just say, "Now I shall stand forgotten." This creepy message was alluding to the fact that once you move on in the game, they remain in place with no real use. Eventually our gamer comes into an odd battle with himself. After losing the battle, the enemy then says,
"Your purpose has been served. End it all before you exist alone forever."
and when he tried to start a new game, he would only get a message that read,
"The dead do not return."
It wasn't until that message that our protagonist realizes the character's fear of a loss of purpose. In at number 4, Whole Again. This creepypasta is about a gamer who was playing Pokemon Black and wished to capture a rare dragon Pokemon that was said to be lurking in the caves. And although along the way he was faced with many creepy signs that warn the dragon needs flesh to survive and to become whole again, he kept seeing this whole again phrasing everywhere he went. He wouldn't come to realize its meaning until he finally battled the mysterious Pokemon. And while in battle, when one of his Pokemon would faint, a piece of them would then now be attached to the enemy's sprite, thus making him whole again. Number 3, the truth hurts. This strange occurrence happened when a gamer was playing Pokemon Black and was faced with a creepy as hell Pokemon. When he gets to the final showdown with N, he's faced first with a battle against a wild Reshiram. He knew that his Pokemon weren't adequate enough to defeat this enemy, so he chose to run instead. But to his surprise, a text box just came up that said, "Would you like to give a nickname to Reshiram?" Confused by this, he just names it Truth. And then it was added to his party. Following this, a cutscene showed Reshiram killing N and then using his blood to write the words, "Truth hurts, doesn't it?" In at number 2, It's Just a Game. This creepypasta is about a gamer who comes across strange shape-shifting Pokemon. And at one point she believes she sees a Clefairy until it suddenly changes into a Gengar. And then the Gengar just lets out an evil laugh before disappearing. Then, while in the rock tunnel, she's confronted by another Pokemon who at first appears to be an Onix that soon changes to jet black with glowing red eyes. Fully believing at this point that she may have purchased a hacked copy of the game, she continues on to see what else it offers. The dark turn happens when she's faced against an unknown trainer named Aaron, who shockingly resembles her best friend Aaron in real life. And when the battle begins, Aaron first uses a Gengar, and then an all-black Onix, and then her final Pokemon was the Buried Alive character. That's when the Aaron character begins to decay like the Buried Alive character, and as the screen flashed red, she threw her Game Boy aside to call her friend. Her friend Aaron tries to calm her down, saying it's just a game. So once she's calm, she returns to the Game Boy to see the Aaron trainer on the screen, facing her, with the text box that said,
"It's just a game, right?"
Lastly, at number 1, Life Force. This creepy tale is about a sinister Litwick. A trainer and her Pokemon were traveling through a dark cave when they saw a flickering light in the distance. The Litwick approached and agreed to help guide them through the tunnel. What they didn't know was that Litwick would be slowly draining the energy from her Pokemon. And when her Dewott finally fainted and died, she desperately tried to reach for a Pokeball to assist her, but Litwick wasn't having any of that. The Pokemon then knocked her down onto the ground, and as her energy was rapidly fading, a text box appeared on the screen that said,
"Death shines like a candle."
Number 5, Disabled. So far, a lot of these creepy things coming from the Pokemon series have a lot to do with strange sounds or frequencies, and this one's no different. Our player in this story was absolutely in love with 2 characters, Jigglypuff and Wigglytuff. When she buys Pokemon Soul Silver, she immediately sets out to capture a Jigglypuff. This takes some time though, but eventually she manages to catch one in the Safari Zone. No matter how high she leveled her new Jigglypuff, she always kept her sing attack because, well, she loved to hum along to the tune. Still set on getting her second favorite Wigglytuff, but understanding how difficult it was to even find Jigglypuff, she decides to put a high level Pokemon on the wireless trade board in hopes of someone trading a Wigglytuff. And well, she gets her wish, and someone trades her, but oddly the Pokemon is called Disabled in all caps. It has one move, Sing. Before entering into a battle with her new Pokemon, she loads up a couple TMs like Hidden Power, Swagger, and Explosion. She enters into a battle with her new Wigglytuff, but for some reason, Sing is disabled. She tries using Hidden Power for Wig, but it fails. She tries to run, but it fails. The words "wants to fight" comes up on the screen. Then, it gets weirder. Wigglytuff begins doing its own actions. Repeatedly, she sees "disabled" try to use Sing. Sing was disabled. Again and again and again this happens. The enemy suddenly appears sick, as if poisoned, and then flees from battle. But Wig doesn't stop. The text box fills the screen. Disabled use struggle. it struggled. Then more, saying, "Why can't I sing? Sing. Sing." The word sing now is flooding the screen. Then randomly an option appears saying, "Can you sing? Yes or no." The player hits no several times, and suddenly the speakers let out a large, loud screeching noise, causing the player to drop her DS. Having enough of this weirdness, she tries trading the Wigglytuff, and when a trade appears, she hits yes several times, begging for it to hurry. When the trade goes through, it was for a Cyndaquil. Its name was Hurry. Number 4, Strangled Red. This creepy hacked game of Pokemon Red was found in a trash bin of all places, and it tells the story of a trainer named Steven and his best friend, a Charizard named Miki. Oddly, when the player starts up the screen, it just reads Pokemon Strangled Red version. Realizing it was a hacked game, he plays anyways. Although, it won't let him continue with the previous player's game, so he hits new game. The player's name was automatically set to Steven. He starts with a single Charmander named Miki, and everything about this game was just a bit different. His character had a smirk and long hair, his rival was actually his brother, and the starter bedroom had 2 of everything. The game played normally, just the storyline was different. Using the Charmander, it quickly evolved into a Charizard by level 25. As soon as the player reached Lavender Town, things started to get weird. He entered into a battle with his brother Blue, and once they were successful, they had a dialogue back and forth at the house that was strange for a solo game. The NPC wanted Steven to trade him his Charizard Miki. After the no button wouldn't work, he reluctantly hit yes. That's when the game froze mid-trade. He turned it off, and when he restarted, the only option was continue, except he didn't have the Charizard and was greeted with a text box that read 1 year later. When he checked his menu, the character was different. Its eyes were blank, the smirk was gone, and his long hair looked messy. Also, Miki was dead. The player pieced together that this character named Steven is actually the previous champion that then becomes your rival in other games. The town seemed to mourn his loss, with almost presenting him with compassion for this disturbed character. And at this point the game takes over, so the player takes Steven to Lavender Town, where all of the NPC trainers seem to ignore him completely, all saying, "Just go. Sometimes dead is best." To read the full story though, and ending as well, look up Pokemon Strangled Red. It's far too gruesome for me to continue from there. Number 3, Ghost Marowak. This story is based on a creepypasta from the wiki page and, like most others, has an unknown author. I wish I could give credit, but it's not there. But it's about a gamer who managed to catch a ghost Marowak by using a hack of infinite Master Balls. Amazingly, Marowak stayed in his party but was simply classified as a regular Marowak. However, the consequences were worse than he thought. With the ghost Marowak now in his party, the gamer lost everything. All of his previously caught Pokemon, every TM, every HM, everything. Anytime that he would enter into the grass, he would always come into battle with a Cubo. Every time. He restarted the game with hopes of it fixing his mistake of choosing to cheat the game. But when he started, his sprite was now replaced by the ghost Marowak. And every time he hits any button, the poor Marowak lets out a cry that will haunt him forever. A difficult task. This next creepypasta was also written by an unknown author and is about the demolition of the Pokemon Tower. Our protagonist in this story is one of the 20 workers who had been tasked with taking down the Pokemon Tower in place of a new radio station that was to be built. He was an average man who said that the last time he had been to Pokemon Tower was to lay his Golduck to rest. His Golduck had jumped out of its Pokeball and bumped into the wrong electrode, causing him to face an untimely demise. And as they were tearing down the tower, it also meant digging up each of the Pokemon's graves to move their caskets. And while the demolition was happening, he began to hear cries of lost Pokemon, and even swore he could see the ghosts of these long deceased Pokemon hovering behind each of the workers. He eventually decided to quit because he couldn't bear to continue tearing up these Pokemon's graves and stacking their bodies like garbage. They belonged to a trainer at one time. They had a life, and now here they were just disturbing their peaceful rest. Why? Because he needed the money? When the radio tower was finally built, he refused to listen to it and didn't want any part of what took place after he left. One day he ran into one of the workers who had stayed, and he looked like he hadn't slept in weeks. He kept saying that every time he listened to the radio, all he could hear was his lost Pokemon crying out to him. Apparently so did all of the other workers who had laid their Pokemon to rest there. If they listened late enough, they would hear the pain and protesting, the growling, the sobs, and the wails of their poor departed Pokemon's restless souls. He was happy he had left when he did, but for those who stayed, They were forever plagued by that difficult task. This final creepypasta was again written by an unknown author and is based on the story called Crushed. It's about a gamer who received the game Heart Gold for Christmas. They were so excited to start a new Pokemon game and decided to transfer over their Dratini named Ryu from the Soul Silver game. One day the gamer couldn't find Heart Gold anywhere, and when their dad came in from shoveling the driveway, he said, "Hey, did you lose this?" They eyed the small cartridge in his hand. The protagonist even asked their father if it had been damaged by the snow. Unfortunately, when their father was moving the car, he had ran over the game and found it in the tire tracks. They grabbed the game quickly and ran upstairs to their bedroom to boot it up to check on their beloved Pokemon. It started up normally, but something was different. The screen was now black and white, and while in the game, there were no NPCs anywhere in sight. All of their Pokemon seemed to have fainted, and their sprites looked horrible, almost as if the pixels had been twisted. Their Leafeon's leaves seemed to be dripping with a blackish liquid, and its eyes were just empty sockets. More importantly, they wanted to make sure that their Ryu was okay, and when checking on it, the Pokemon just said, "Ryu is crushed." Beginning to now cry, they pleaded with the game repeatedly, saying how sorry they were for letting this happen. And again, more text boxes appeared, "Ryu is cold," and then another saying, "You left us to die," and then another, "He crushed us," over and over and over. Those words over and over began to rapidly fill the screen. The screen began to flash. Black bars appeared almost as if this screen was in a widescreen mode. The black bars slowly closed in as the buildings in the game fell to the ground, and screams of Pokemon blared through their speakers. One last message from the Ryu appeared that just said, "How do you like being," and then nothing followed. Confused and upset, they threw their Game Boy aside, wiping their tears away. As they wiped their tears away, they stared at the ceiling. The gamer let out a scream that could have been heard by every house on the block. Written on the ceiling in bold letters was just the word "crushed."